Years of built-up frustration finally reached the surface. I had seen what they did to me, and it reminded him of everything they had once done to him too. Then he told me something that caught me completely off guard. Years ago, the family had paid hush money to cover up a workplace harassment case involving my wife's father. It had happened when her father-in-law was still running one of his businesses. The alleged victim was a junior employee, and during his summer internship there, my wife's cousin had seen some of the emails and internal memos marked confidential. He showed me screenshots and partial documents. The payout had been disguised through a legal settlement that never made it to court. I didn't plan to use any of it. I didn't even copy the files. I simply took note of what he shared and added the key details to my own records. I thanked him for trusting me, promised him that if things ever escalated, I would keep his name out of everything. Before leaving, he warned me to be careful. The family wasn't used to being challenged, especially not from the inside. That same week, my wife arranged a sit-down between me and her sister. She thought maybe there was still a chance to patch things up. I agreed, but only on the condition that we meet in a public place. We chose a quiet cafe. Her sister showed up dressed like she was meeting a client for brunch. She smiled brightly, ordered a fancy drink, and tried starting with small talk. I didn't waste any time. I got straight to the point. When I brought up all the hurtful comments made over the years, she brushed them off as harmless jokes. She couldn't remember a single instance where she defended me but insisted I must have misunderstood the tone. The conversation went nowhere. I stood up, paid for my coffee, and walked away without another word. Back home, I told my wife again. Surface-level apologies weren't enough. Jokes that cut someone down aren't harmless. And anyone unwilling to admit that had no place around our child. This time she didn't argue. A few days later, she started individual therapy sessions. She wanted to understand how she had let it all slide for so long. I told her therapy wasn't about assigning blame. It was about taking accountability. If we were going to build a better home for our child, it had to start with truth. Later that week, I went to pick up our child from daycare. A woman I didn't recognize approached me outside. She introduced herself as a longtime friend of my wife's mother. She bent down, looked at the baby, and said with a sly smile, "Raising a little rebel, I see." Then she walked off without another word. I didn't wait. I went straight to the daycare director and asked that all family and contact information be restricted. I gave them a list of approved individuals and instructed them to inform me immediately about any unexpected visits or inquiries. The director understood and made the changes that very same day. 2 days later, my wife's cousin contacted me again. He had overheard a phone conversation between her mother and one of the uncles. The family was planning a dinner, not for reconciliation but to set the record straight. Their goal was to spin a narrative, that I had been unstable, aggressive, and was trying to destroy the family's image. An invitation came via group email. I didn't ignore it. I replied directly in the thread, stating that I would not attend any staged events meant to rewrite history. I made it clear that I would not participate in theatrics, and anyone still in denial about their behavior was free to stay that way, just not around me, my wife, or our child. Only one person replied, an uncle. He sent back a sarcastic message, called me dramatic, and accused me of poisoning the family bond. I didn't respond. I saved the email, logged the date, and filed it away with the rest of the records. The silence after that was louder than any noise that had come before. 2 weeks after their failed dinner stunt, I received a letter in the mail. It stood out immediately, handwritten, thick paper, no return address. Inside was a folded note from my wife's aunt, written neatly in blue ink. She started by apologizing for not speaking up sooner. She admitted that she had seen the comments, the jokes, the quiet digs, but stayed silent to keep the peace. The family, she wrote, was fully aware of how I had been treated. They just chose not to call it out because it was easier to go along with it than to challenge it. I handed the letter to my wife without saying a word. She read it once, then again. She admitted it meant something, but she wasn't ready to rebuild any bridges without real accountability. We didn't reply. The letter wasn't a bridge. It was a confirmation. Over the next few days, my wife slowly stopped answering calls from her parents. No big speeches, no dramatic posts. She simply declined visits, skipped the usual weekend check-ins, and ignored invitations. It didn't go unnoticed. Her father sent a long group message accusing her of abandoning the family, being brainwashed, and allowing outside influence to destroy their foundation. His exact words. After reading it, she handed me her phone. Without hesitation, I blocked his number on her behalf. Contact was over. Finally. With the noise muted, I started focusing on something new. An idea that had been growing in the back of my mind ever since that first barbecue joke about plastic forks. A children's book. Not about me directly. Just a simple story about second chances, about how mistakes don't define who you are. At night, after our baby fell asleep, I worked on the outline. I wasn't aiming to publish it. It was just about building something that reflected the world I wanted for my child. Something honest, something real. One evening while I was working, my wife received a message from an old childhood friend. Someone who had been there during our wedding planning and had once laughed along with the family jokes. This time she messaged to say she regretted it. She admitted she joined in because it was easier. But she also revealed something else. The family had been calling around trying to spread rumors about me. Accusing me of forging documents to get funding, or of using someone else's credentials to start my first project. None of it was true. But gossip doesn't need truth to cause damage. The next day, I reached out to a public relations consultant specializing in crisis reputation control. We sat down together. I laid out everything, screenshots, dates, messages. They got to work immediately. Within a week, they identified a pattern of social media posts and linked IP ranges consistent with activity from my wife's brother's previous employer. It was clumsy, but it was enough to prove intent. I had the findings notarized, copied, and stored securely. I didn't fire back. I didn't engage. I simply prepared in case they ever tried it again. Then came the moment that showed how far the gossip had spread. At a routine pediatric checkup, a nurse made a passing comment. Something about how it must be nice to have turned it all around. It was casual, said with a smile, but it had that edge. Like she knew a version of my life that wasn't hers to know. I didn't raise my voice. I calmly corrected her, gave her the actual timeline, and pointed out that juvenile records were sealed and shouldn't be a topic for hallway chatter. I asked for her name. I made a note. And I requested to speak with the clinic manager immediately. The message was clear. There would be no more pretending. That afternoon when we got home, my wife said she wanted to try one more thing. Not to fix her family, but to feel less isolated. She scheduled a video call with both sets of grandparents, hers and mine, just to talk. Her goal wasn't to repair what was broken. It was simply to see if anyone from the older generation could understand the bigger picture. The call happened on a Sunday evening. 4 windows split the screen. My parents, her paternal grandparents, her maternal grandparents, and us. My wife led the conversation. Calm, steady. No raised voice, no sugarcoating. She walked them through the timeline, the years of subtle humiliation, the constant jokes, the silence every time a line was crossed. She explained why we had stepped away, and what would need to change before we would ever consider returning. To our surprise, her grandparents didn't push back. In fact, they responded better than anyone expected. Her grandfather leaned forward and said he was tired of the family pretending that image was more important than integrity. He shared a story none of us had ever heard before, how he once made a major financial mistake in his 30s, a bad investment that nearly cost the family business. But no one turned it into a joke. No one defined him by it. What they had done to me wasn't just unfair, he said. It was cruel. I stayed quiet for most of the call. Let her speak. Let them listen. But for the first time, someone on her side wasn't just hearing us. They were standing up and saying, this was wrong. It didn't fix everything. But it mattered. A few days later, my wife told me that her cousin, the one who had come forward with the family secrets, had decided to move out of state. He found a new job and cut ties with everyone except us. He said he was tired of walking on eggshells. He wanted a fresh start somewhere he wasn't seen as a liability. Around that same time, her sister reached out again. She sent a message asking if they could meet at a spa to reset things. My wife didn't jump at it. She asked for my opinion. I told her it sounded like damage control, not real change. She agreed to meet, but only if it was in a public place, and she brought a friend for support. They met at a hotel cafe. Her sister started with compliments, then circled around, trying to frame everything as a misunderstanding. She said I had misread their humor, that I was always too reactive. She didn't apologize. She redirected. She tried to flip the narrative back to familiar territory. But this time my wife didn't let it slide. She told her sister, firmly, directly, and with her friend there as witness, that it wasn't humor. It was bullying. And she wasn't going to excuse it anymore. This time, the silence belonged to her sister.